O kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News with me, Pat, and with George. Evening, George. How are you, sir?
Good, thank you.
Feeling well? Feeling good? Did you get any snow?
Not where I don't know. There were random. I think the cars with snow on them had just come down off the hills, I guess. But yeah, there was it was wiped out.
It was a pretty cold one in Dunedin over the last few days. I think today's high was, 4. Yesterday's was 3. And the day before, I think, was 5. So it's been a bit of a chilly patch coming through. And no, we didn't get any snow at our house, but I live in a valley. On one side of the valley, on the kind of sunny side of the valley. So you look across to the other side of the valley, and on all those, I nearly said rooftops, thinking of the hills. On the top of all those hills, there was certainly a dusting. So all day, I went up to the local soccer field with the dog at about 1 o'clock this afternoon in 2 degrees, and it was quite lovely running the dog on the soccer field, and then looking up over the side, and there was a dusting of snow on the hills. It felt quite beautiful, actually. So yes, very, 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 very cold. Fire's been going sort of 24/7 since about Saturday morning. But quite nice. One of the things I like about Dunedin actually is the climate. I like the cold, and I like, not that I like being cold, but I like the difference, and I like that you get these days that are sort of here in Dunedin that we call them ironically snow days. That today wasn't a snow day, but a snow day is basically when all of Dunedin just shuts because there's snow in the hills. Because if there's snow in the hills, people can't get to work, so they just shut everything down. It's great. And everyone gets like a day off, and it doesn't work when you're working for yourself so much, but the kids love it because it's a day of school. And then you go up to Walkery Hospital and, ride the roasting dishes down the hills and that kind of stuff. I had a friend tell me once, George, that, probably back in the 80s or 90s when she was a kid, she rode a roasting dish on the snow down Baldwin Street, steepest street in the world, was covered in snow, and they snowed down. They went down it using sleds down the steepest street in the world on a snow day, which is pretty impressive.
Just don't do it in a wheelie bin.
No, yes, very, very bad idea. Very bad idea. The other thing that's a bad idea, which we'll get onto shortly, is being a 16-year-old at a fucking boarding school and smashing a 13-year-old, potentially, can't confirm or not, says the person, with bed legs, and then apologizing for it 20 years later because you're about to get into politics. That's not really a good idea either. And I'm a bit grumpy about this. And one of the reasons I'm a bit grumpy about this, we'll get to the full story shortly, is because I went to boarding school. A school called Sacred Heart College in Auckland, in Glen Innes, called sort of Eastish Auckland. And I knew a lot of people who went to King's. And to be honest with you, the story I hear about Sam Uffindell today does not sound unusual to me. I've heard it before. I've seen it before. And I just think you entitled, selfish, stuck-up little piece of shit. That's what I think. And we'll get into more details about that shortly. And I'll tell you some more stuff that I know, actually, and some ideas about what's been going on there. But anyway, the other thing we're going to do tonight is we're going to be having a chat also with Mark Graham. Mark Graham is the guy who started up FARC Off Brian, which is I guess it's a protest group, but they're calling themselves a counter-protest group. They're a counter-protest group against the Freedom and Rights Coalition against Brian Tamaki, hence FARC Off Brian, FARC. Off Brian. He's going to be coming and joining us at about 20 past, 25 past. And we've got a conversation later tonight, which is a pre-record, where we are talking to a PhD student in Denmark whose area of research is cults of personalities. She wrote a piece for the conversation talking about, is Jacinda Ardern popular, or is there a cult of personality around her? And we'd organised to have this chat last week, and it just so happens that after the Freedom and Rights Coalition and Brian Tamaki do their thing over the weekend, it kind of feels like it works to flow into that conversation as well. So we'll talk about Brian Tamaki, Freedom and Rights Coalition, FARC Off Brian, and then after that we'll have the interview with Anne-Mette about the name, about what it means to have a cult of personality around you. I learned a lot from this chat. It's a pre-record, and so hopefully you'll enjoy that as well. But Jorge, let's start off having a look over the weekend at the National Party conference. There are some people that are saying National Party is, when like Donald Trump comes out and he goes to his tried and true, build that wall or lock her up, all that kind of shit. Some people are coming out saying that it feels like National is going back to a bit of its roots of beneficiary bashing. But you've been having a look at the details about what has actually been said and what it's all about. So over to you, good sir.
Yeah, a majority of the keynote speech from Christopher Luxon, the leader of the National Party, to that meeting in Christchurch was about this new welfare policy. He contributed a lot of time to it, and we've got some clips here. This was it. Basically, his rhetoric reflects those old tropes that you just mentioned. The sort of young people on the benefit are doomed to like a life of dependency on the dole, and he started that part of the speech, which is basically the whole speech was about this welfare policy. By sort of, he started with that narrative here.
And conversely, if you're on a benefit before you turn 20, across your lifetime, you're likely to spend 12 years on welfare. And I know people are worried about this. I was talking to a mum in Wellington recently whose son has been absent from school for so long that just last week he was unenrolled. And now he's going straight onto the benefit, and she's really worried sick about what his future will look like. And frankly, she's right to be worried, because welfare dependency pushes people further away from the rungs of social mobility. It locks them out of opportunities and a sense of purpose and social connections that jobs can provide. And benefit dependency not only harms the person trapped on a benefit, but it can also harm the children who grow up in benefit-dependent households.
So he sets it up from the jump that there's this sort of that, that there's sort of a separate class that once they're on the benefit, then that's it, and that the only way to sort of be a productive member of the community, in touch with the community, is to have a job. The other main thing he does in the speech is separate the unemployed beneficiary sort of class from taxpayers. He actually does this a few times in this clip.
And right now, with businesses crying out for workers, there are 50,000 more New Zealanders on a job seeker benefit than there were under National. And as you know, their benefits come from the taxes paid by other New Zealanders who would gratefully have kept that money if they hadn't had to pay it in tax. And yet every measure of dependency on the job seeker benefit has...
That point always annoys me, that somehow people on a benefit have never paid tax before, and that taxpayers are purely taxpayers and have never had access to a benefit or had that social safety net. It's this example of how, like you say, it's good old school right-wing politics of separating the country into taxpayer and leeches, basically.
Before you start though, again, I mean, look, I know that some workplaces are screaming out for people to come and work for them, but at the moment I'm looking at the article that these images are from, and it says we have a record low unemployment rate of 3.2%. So it sounds like the narrative they're saying is all these bums who are sitting there they get out and get a job. It's like, well, actually, when is it ever lower than 3.2%? Like, when is it, like, you know what I mean? Like it's a low unemployment rate at the moment. And I saw a tweet, and I'm going to paraphrase it over the weekend about this. Someone was saying, imagine looking at New Zealand and thinking the biggest problem is those teenagers who won't get a job. Imagine that would be the center point of the focus of your conversation over the weekend when you are launching the next 12 months up to an election. That the biggest takeaway you want the whole country to get is, you know what? Those fucking 16-year-olds who are being a bit lazy, we're going to get those guys and then everything will be okay. It's just, I don't get it. It's bizarre.
Especially when economists talk about how low unemployment contributes to high inflation. Right, and that's one of the issues we've been seeing here recently. Yeah, the number of work-ready people on a benefit has dropped by 10%. It also rose due to COVID. It also rose before that during the Labour government, and Luxon points this out. But in his worldview, it's automatically a bad thing for more people to have access to the benefit, right? There's no conceptualizing in his mind that maybe people who have always maybe needed access to the benefit have finally been able to access it under the Labor government. That's automatically a negative thing for him. To summarize we'll go here. This is basically summarizing the welfare policy that was discussed in the keynote speech.
So today I'm announcing welfare that works. It's a new approach to getting young people at risk of long-term welfare dependency into work. Because the increasing numbers of young people on welfare shows us that the Ministry of Social Development is not giving them priority. And a national government will not keep funding failure by government departments. If government departments can't...
This is a direct threat to the Ministry of Social Development. It's
sure.
basically, we're coming for you. And while I'm on that point, the third-party organisations that he wants to put taxpayer money into instead of the Ministry of Social Development, and I'm sure they're wonderful and everything, but faith-based community organisations like Vision West in Auckland, right? I'm sure they're great. Actually, I have no fucking idea who they are. But that's the thing. That's when they say these third-party community providers, that somehow that cancels out the fact that National's always saying they're going to save money or spend less money.
Yeah.
Somehow they're going to pay these people at the same time. But anyway, sorry. Continue.
Can't deliver, we'll find someone else who can, because we care about outcomes. So in this case...
He's going to fire the Ministry of Social Development.
Yeah.
So in this case, we will bring community providers into the mix, redirecting some funding from the Ministry of Social Development and getting community providers to do the job instead. We'll contract them to provide under 25-year-olds who've been on the benefit for 3 months or more with a dedicated job coach to help them get into work. Young job seekers will get more support with a proper assessment of their barriers and an individual job plan to address those barriers and then find a job.
To me, it sounds completely redundant. That's a function that's already pretty much handled by work and income.
Yeah, let me also say this. I mean, I've got one of the quotes from this overall interview up on my screen here. I won't bring it up, but I'll just read it. Louise Upston, who's I think responsible for social welfare, I think. She from National, she's pointed out the individual work plans as the main change for National's previous policies in the status quo. Quote, this is individualized. So in other words, the work plans are individualized. This is individualized, and that's the difference. It's hands-on, it's individualized, and it's about getting outcomes. We don't want to fund things that don't work. She acknowledges the jobs coaching scheme, which Luxon just talked about, would mean a bigger upfront cost, but it would be worth it in the long term. If you're with us last week, you'll know that I went off on my nut about the National Party doing playing the shell game, shifting, take away, look away. Sure. Now, remember what they've been saying for the last 6 months. How much money the government's spending, how much bureaucracy there is out there, how they have to get less bureaucracy. Now, what they're now saying is when Labor's adding new people into, publicly funded positions, when Labor's adding to various public entities, that's bad. That's adding to democracy. But they're actively saying what we're going to do is add in job coaches, and we are acknowledging that it's a big upfront cost. So when National wants to add more money to the public sector and employ more people and have more quote unquote bureaucrats, it's okay. But when Labor does it, that's the worst thing for our economy since inflation. So I just want to say again, remember the shell game that we've been talking about. This is a part of it. Labor adds to the public sector, bad. We add to the public sector. Well, it's good because we're doing it for a good reason. So just be real clear on what's happening here.
Yeah, it's completely, it's nonsense, right? Those words like individualized, like work and income, for example, helped me get a driver's license, right? Here's an outcome that we can all be proud of, and which will better my responsibilities and social mobility and that sort of thing. That was an individualized driver's license that they helped me get. It wasn't like every man and his dog around me somehow got a driver's license as well,
Yeah.
or that I was swept away in some sort of driver's license mob or anything like that. That was an individualized, case managed thing.
And when Louise Upson talks about individualized work plans, that means a different work plan for every person. Now, when you save money in a big organization, you basically make it one plan for as many people as possible. That's how you save money. Making a different plan for every person, having a different way of doing it, individualizing for every single person is going to cost stacks more money. Now, I'm not even saying it's a bad idea, right? I actually think individualized work plans or individualized attention within a system is a good plan because you don't get people falling through the cracks. But what I'm saying is this will cost a shit ton more. And National are the ones that have been saying for such a long time that Labour's spending too much in the public sector. This will add a huge amount of money to the public sector in the area of work and income. It just absolutely will if they're going to individualized plans. Because everyone needs to be addressed and looked after. And, you might have to spend a lot of hours on one person for one situation, whereas the way you save money is you spend a lot of hours on one situation for 1,000 people. That's not an individualized work plan. So I can't stand the fucking hypocrisy. Anything?
The third party thing as well, like it goes to something we've talked about before about, accountability and transparency and the reason we have government departments that pull together money and then decide where they're going to put that money, and that's all transparent and that sort of thing. Like if we look at some of the quotes here, basically Luxon saying, whatever it takes to get an outcome, we're going, it sounds like he's going to gut the Ministry of Social Development. And if that means we're going to be powering down MSD resources and budgets and redirecting that very strongly into community organizations, we will do that. Now, surely you need that foundation to redirect that money to decide where it goes. But, and I noted before, one of the organizations there who wants to, quote unquote, power up. That's pretty much it from his keynote. But surprisingly, I was actually quite surprised looking through it. It's all about beneficiary. It's all about this welfare policy. It's all about beneficiaries. It's all about an us versus them sort of thing, and also these old tropes, these old narratives of basically if you're on a benefit when you're young, then you're doomed.
Yeah, and I guess it works for national voters, and that's why they use tropes. That's why they go back to any political party goes back to their tried and true. And it's, I'm sure we keep jotting down things to put into our drinking game when it comes to the debates, the squeezed middle, the trickle down economics, the, giving a progressive tax cut, all these things. And this is one of them. It's, putting out the appearance that if we can help these on the lowest benefit, that'll help everybody. But what they're doing, in my opinion, is just trying to remove people from the benefit, make it harder for them to get them into the workforce. And where are they going to go? 3.2% unemployment at the moment. It's like, what percentage of our population can't work? I mean, is it 1 or 2%? So what does that make the actual unemployment? Like when I say can't, I mean aren't capable for whatever reason. I'm really surprised that they would just go straight back to, straight out of the 80s and 90s playbook to see if it's going to work for them this time around. I mean, next there'll be another speech out of Orewa, and then that'll be the end of it. Then you'll know they're right back online. Yeah. Anyway, if that's it, should I get on my soapbox?
Yeah.
All right. This prick, is that the best way to start? This little prick. I'm so annoyed about this. I'm so annoyed about this for so many reasons, right? Now, if anyone wants to come at us for defamation or whatever, it is my honest held belief that this person is a little bitch and I think they're a prick. All right. That is my honest held belief, and I will stand up and stand by that anytime I want. He's a fucking MP now, this guy, Sam Uffindell, and we've heard that National knew about this attack before they allowed him to be one of their candidates, before they put him in to be one of their candidates. Now, whether they knew the extent of it or not, I don't know. We're being told that this little prick was a part of a group who beat up a 13-year-old when they were 15, 16, 17, and he can't confirm whether they used bed legs to beat this child or not. Let me read you something. I've some comments coming in tonight from people who are at boarding school. I went to boarding school. I loved boarding school. Maybe one of the reasons I'm so angry about this is this little prick is the example of someone who went to boarding school that gives the boarding school a bad name. I went to a place called Sacred Heart College, loved it, loved boarding school, loved being there. It was like being on a camp with 30 of my best mates all year round, loved it. But there's a reputation around boarding schools that kids get abused, that kids get beaten up and bullied and stuff. And this little prick is the example as to why that is out there. This privileged, self-entitled, wealthy little fuckwit. Right. So just have a listen to this, especially if you're a boarder, right? At whatever school you were at, if this happened to you. He had been in his bed in his dorm room after lights out when 4 older boys come in and jumped on him and began beating him. He said, this is the guy who was attacked. He said he thought the boys had been using wooden bed legs unscrewed from their dorms. I was covering my head. They were smashing me, he said. I don't remember much, but when it was over, everyone ran into the next dorm and lay down on the floor between the beds there to hide. The victim says later on there were photos taken of his injuries. They show the skinny little white kid covered in bruises, he said. His ribs weren't cracked, but there was some damage to cartilage. Now, another reason I'm pretty pissed about this and pretty passionate about it is, let's just be honest, right? I'm going to play the race card. If this was a brown, poor kid from South Auckland, first of all, he wouldn't have been, quote, asked to leave. He would have been fucking expelled. How can you, what's this language going around the media at the moment that this little prick was asked to leave because he assaulted a 13-year-old, potentially with a wooden bed leg? The other thing this little prick, this little asshole, this little fuckwit has come out saying today was this, quote, "It was one of the silliest, stupidest things I've ever done. I really regretted it, and I do really regret it still." Just let that mull on you for a minute. This was one of the silliest, stupidest things. So this is not the stupidest thing he's ever done. This was one of them. So what else has this little prick been up to be anywhere that in any kind of leadership role in this country? This little prick, if he was a brown poor boy from South Auckland at a boarding school, there'd be words like violent offender. There'd be words like anger. There's no way they'd be walking into a position like this with this being hidden away from the voters until it gets brought out by the victim as the person who's brought this story out. And the reason the victims brought this story out was because this little prick apologized to him just before he went into politics. Oh, there's a coincidence. He just felt after 20 years that was the right time to try and mea culpa to the guy he potentially beat with a wooden leg from a bed. That was the appropriate time to do. He just felt that for no real reason. He just felt that was the right time to do it. Nothing to do with him trying to get into politics. Yeah, right. Tui billboard. Oh, please, Tui, I will donate to you. I will donate to you if you make that a billboard. Someone watching, Photoshop me a billboard, tweet it to me. Something like, I didn't apologize because I was getting into politics. Sam Uffindell. Yeah, right. Good one. And I'm really shocked and disgusted. And look, you guys all know I'm not a national voter at all, right? But I'm really disappointed in the National Party as one of our political parties that they would have this person as one of their candidates. Look, I know that there's a redemption story. I know that people can do stupid things in their teens. We've all done them and go by them. But to be honest, the victim in this says, and this is the article, says that the apology doesn't feel real. And it's obvious to me, at least, it's my honest hell belief, that the apology was based around, you know, he realized he was going to get into politics and he better clean up this mess from his younger age group. And just the idea that and I'll say this, it feels to me when you're wealthy and privileged and white, you get asked to leave King's College after you assault someone. When you're poor and brown and in South Auckland, well, then what happens is you get expelled, you know? So I'm just, you know, I'm completely over it. There's a thing within boarding, and bear with me if this word finds you offensive, because it doesn't mean what it's going to say and say it means straight away. There's a thing called fagging in boarding schools, and no, it's nothing to do with that. It comes from the 1700s in England, and fagging is when older boys basically have the younger boys as servants. That's what it's called. And I was at boarding school in the 1990s. I went to Sacred Heart College. I had friends who were at King's College. This is the school that this guy is from. Now, in that situation, fagging was still happening at King's, right? It was still going on. It was still happening. And it was a part of everyday life. Often fagging, which is a power imbalance between boys with no frontal lobe development, turns into an abusive relationship. And when I read this story, that's all I could think of. And I'm really annoyed about it. And I'm really annoyed that this person is now in the halls of power. And this person has spent the last week in the halls of power, this little prick, bitching at Labour for being soft on crime. Well, he got to walk away from an assault when he was 16 and go off to another expensive private boys' school. I'm done with him. And as I say that, George, you can pick up now because I've realized I've forgotten to send the link for our conversation to our next chat. So I'm going to go off and do that while you're kind of bringing me down, and then we'll chat.
So yeah, the crux for me, I guess, is that it's a reflection of the power imbalance that Pat talks about, right? That there's actually sort of, to me at least, little surprise that someone like this, from that culture of private school, violent dynamics, ends up in the National Party, or rather in politics and in general. It seems like a sort of fitting place for someone like that to be. But there's also the other element, obviously, the sort of cloak and dagger sort of getting ahead of the story by apologizing to the victim, and what the victim said was an unsincere way, because they know what's coming, right? Because they know the election's coming up and that sort of thing. But again, yeah, that's the crux for me, is the power dynamics that this reflects, that this represents in society, that those in a privileged position like that do violence, and daily, literally, or however, conceptually, and get away with it, and are installed in places of power probably because of it. It probably contributes to their position in their social circles and that kind of thing.
I never really knew why I was banned from the National Party Facebook page. I can see there's probably a reason to do it now, but let me just say this. Sam Uffindell, why don't you come on our shows? Let's talk border to border about what the fuck you think is acceptable behavior, especially when you're quoted today saying this. In 2022, which means the story's just come out now, Uffindell said it was the last day of the year and we were just being silly and playing up, and we got carried away and we did what we did. Yeah, we just took potentially, because it does actually say in the same story that he can't, after the matter came to light in 2022, Uffindell said he couldn't recall if he and other attackers used bed legs as weapons, but couldn't rule it out. Yeah, I know, it's hard, isn't it? It's hard. Thinking's hard. All those times. I wonder if it's because there's been so many assaults that you just get them all a bit confused sometimes. He says with his tongue in his cheek so as not to get sued. It's shocking. But anytime, you're welcome, Mr. Uffindell. Come on, have a chat to us about, the leadership you want to show the country today as an MP, and the revolting abuse you chose to show when you had a position of leadership as a senior in a school. Tell us what you've learned between that leadership and the leadership you think you're going to demonstrate to us now as a politician in our houses of power, criticizing the government for being soft on crime. Why don't you come say g'day? Should we chat to you? Maybe we'll give Mr. Woodhouse a call tomorrow and see if he can set up a chat with us. That'd be good. Love to have a chat with you. Fuckwit. All right. That, just so you know, George, I'm sorry, that's not out of my system yet. You might think it should be out of my system, but it's not. It's still there. It's still in my system. I don't know why we're doing this tonight. We're about to fucking talk about Brian Tamaki. I'm going to go off the deep end by the end of tonight. Let's get in Mark Graham. Let some sensible people join us. G'day, Mark.
How are you, mate?
I'm pretty fired up, to be honest, to be frank.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, man. Hey, listen, we're going to change tack. Well, are we? Aren't we? We're talking about assholes with too much power who think that they can get away with crimes and stuff. Maybe we aren't going to change tack by that much entirely. Let's have a look at something that was played on One News over the weekend. Auckland's Domain. There's the botanical gardens behind it there. Mr. Tamaki, and I don't know if it's his Freedom and Rights Coalition, but he's certainly associated with the Freedom and Rights Coalition, held one of their little adorable protests. And in that protest, Mr. Tamaki talked about a new political, maybe new political party, new political initiative, whatever it was. We're going to play a couple of minutes of this first, Mark, and then we'll get on with what you guys got up to over the weekend.
Politics and swiped at both Labour and National.
This has got to be the worst, the most oppressive government. And we have also the most cowardly, most shameful, disgraceful opposition.
Near the stage, volunteers took registrations for the new Umbrella Party. Brian Tamaki told the crowd firm verbal agreements are in place with 4 small parties, with the Memorandum of Understanding now being finalised. So when will it become a party?
So I'd say probably at the end of August, early September.
Can you yet name these other 4 parties that you're talking to?
You know very well the answer to that. No, I can't. But I can tell you the unity is really good.
Brian Tamaki says he himself won't stand for Parliament.
There you go. Don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that was something that happened over the weekend. Mark, you were there. Is it your group? I was going to say with your group, or is it your initiative? The aptly named FARC Off Brian. Tell us about FARC Off Brian and what you were doing in the Domain over the weekend.
Well, I kind of call myself a catalyst. As opposed to making it my group or anything like that. I mean, I was, I guess, the initiator last Tuesday night on Twitter. It was like, wouldn't it be great to have a counter protest there up against Brian Tamaki's hate group? And it kind of exploded from there, really. So we got up there and we had a solid group. I wouldn't say it was large, but it was a little bit bigger than small. There was about 150 of us at our peak. And we were up there just to tell Brian that his kind of rhetoric, his kind of political philosophy is really not welcome in our community. And we wanted to make a stand against the hate speech.
Is this something that is just like a one-off? You did it for the weekend because you wanted to be there? Or is this something you're now going to grow and build and sort of make your presence known when these, Freedom and Rights Coalition people, anti-vaxxers, anti-mask people turn up?
Honestly, when we started it, we didn't look beyond the weekend. But now that the weekend's done and dusted, we're kind of reconvening and we're chatting amongst ourselves. There's like a core group, people who really stood up over the weekend and helped me moderate on the website, for instance, and help me organize the rally that we had, the counter protest rally. So we've got a core group, but then there's also everybody else that's jumped in, and we had 1,000 people join in within the first 2 days, and we've doubled that over the weekend. So I would like to think that we can take it further. I would like to think that the next time Brian tries to bring something like this, that we can get a larger group out there, and that'll be part of what we do on the Facebook page and out on the various other platforms. And we're now starting to engage with tangata whenua, and I very much hope that we can bring those guys in to stand with us as well. I mean, we did have Maori there, but not in any kind of official way, and I really want to see if we can really build on that.
You say in your about of the Facebook page, we're here to counter hate groups, the so-called Freedoms and Rights Coalition, and their opposition to masks and vaccinations and their lies about our democracy. So what is it about that in particular? Like, I mean, we've been talking for a long time here on the show about, the importance of masks and everyone getting vaccinated. What is it about them, and what is it about you guys that you want to broadcast more of that? Why do you feel the need to make sure more people know about, things like vaccinations, masks, etc., etc.?
Well, there are a number of things that kind of got caught up at through the pandemic. So one of these things is the right-wing movements coming out of America, who are, led by Steve Bannon and his Chinese ex-billionaire, now bankrupt counterpart, who have gone through Europe trying to line up, coalesce all the right-wing groups over there, looking at, and of course they platform Counterspin.
Yep.
And their funding, or there seems to be funding coming from America, perhaps via Australia, into right-wing groups like Tamaki's group and the Voices for Freedom and so forth. So, these, let's face it, these are fascistic movements, right? And if we do not stand up to them, then they grow in power because they intimidate others. They use issues as wedges to get in and divide our country, and ultimately, Tamaki's message, his political message, is one of authoritarian, anti-democratic approach to how we govern ourselves. He is calling for the Labour government to stand down, regardless of any elections, because he says that they are their authority is not valid.
Yeah.
And his group, 500 there on Sunday, which was half what he had the week before, supposedly is the source of authority. And they just want what they want to have happen. And that's all wrapped up in the vaccines and the masks and the mandates and the lockdowns that we undertook as a country together to beat a pandemic, a virus that is killing millions, still killing millions of people around the world. That message gets lost too much in the focus on the marches and the thug group and behind them.
Yeah. And the thing that's fascinating to me is there's still people out there. There's some morons in the chat right now asking about where's the evidence that masks and vaccines work. I mean, if I understand that these are the kinds of people that I wouldn't trust to sit the right way on a toilet seat. But one Google search, one Google search, one look at any bit of evidence, any bit of research. I've talked to all of the people who are working in the laboratories. I don't talk to the politicians about this kind of stuff. I talk to the Anna Brooks and the Michael Bakers and the Susie Wiles and the Michael Plancks and the David Welshes, all the people who the news talks to are the people we talk to about it. And I have this thing, Mark, sometimes that I'd be interested in your thoughts around this, that I say to people who want to engage with me, I say to them, are you prepared to change your mind? And if they say no, I go, well, thanks, I'm not looking for an argument. But if they say, yeah, I am prepared to change my mind, then I'm happy to engage with people. And it's very easy to show anyone the facts and figures as to why these things work. So I guess I'm wondering for you, how do you guys, if that's part of your intention, do that on a bigger scale, a grander scale?
Look, Hannah from Counterspin interviewed me last Thursday, and she started off asking why we were organizing a counter protest and what our objectives were. And then it evolved into her trying to engage me in debate around whether vaccines worked or not, or were safe or not. And I just didn't want to engage on that because I just didn't see the point. I've had ongoing arguments for years with an anti-vax cousin in Whangarei who now kind of, disowns me. He has cut me off. He's cut off his own father.
Wow.
Who tried to engage with him as well. And so I know the difficulty of talking to these people down these rabbit holes. The fact is they'll bring out one dubious doctor or scientist, and for every one that they bring out, there is 100 or 1,000 scientists, epidemiologists, public health specialists who say the exact opposite. But their viewpoint is, well, I'm not going to listen to those 1,000 people. I'm going to listen to this one guy.
Yeah,
because
it fits
he
my narrative.
reinforces what my beliefs are.
Yeah.
Rupert Murdoch, this is a favorite quote of mine. Rupert Murdoch once said, it's the duty of every publication to reflect the prejudices of its readers. Right? I mean, it's all about confirmation bias. and so, you know, the modern internet, the modern social media platforms that we have, not only provide a better tool to that confirmation bias, but actually, when you get Facebook involved, it actually encourages and drives people down that confirmation bias, which is, you know, one reason why I'm on Facebook a lot less these days.
Hey, last question from me, Mark. George, if you've got anything, you feel free to jump in, brother. But you're talking about this could be something more than just the weekend. You know, Brian Tamaki's talking about going to Wellington. Have you guys had any conversations or thoughts about joining in down there?
We're not specifically, but I do know that there is another group that is organising a protest against Brian down there, and I certainly hope that people jump in on that. There will be information coming out across various platforms around it. I've already seen it on Twitter, and I've also been told that in Otautahi in Christchurch, there's another group that's going to be organising something against those guys down there as well.
Yeah. All right.
And you know, before we finish up, there's one other
Yep.
thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is about Tamaki, the man himself. Now, you know, I don't know him personally, so I'm not going to get into any kind of personal attacks on him. I'm sure he's a very charming man, but his bigotry and his intolerance for alternative viewpoints and for you know, alternative lifestyles feeds into the grift that he has going in exploiting marginalized people who are the most vulnerable. And it's appalling. And he feeds back hate into those people that then translates into things like doxing, which we've been warned about now, that is looking like it's going to start happening.
Yep.
Obviously, the accusation of rape that I had against me last week,
Right.
and assorted other, you know, personally violent rhetoric and tactics to try to get us to shut up.
But you're not going to shut up.
Oh, you know, much to my wife's disappointment, I'm a bit what's the word?
Reticent to
Stupid.
shut up. Yeah, but stupid. Hey, Mark, thanks for joining us tonight, mate. Really appreciate
Pleasure.
your thoughts.
Thanks.
And I'm sure we'll be in contact another time and have a chat about it. All right, George, I'm about to go off and play something, but before I do, I'm always sort of 6 to 1, half a dozen of the other, whether I engage with the trolls. But you know, people in the chat are talking about, you know, COVID not being a big deal, etc., 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 etc. This was a clip from one of, it's only 2 minutes. I'm going to play it, and then I'm going to play the last interview before we head off. Professor Michael Baker, University of Otago, who was talking about how dangerous COVID is at the moment, how dangerous COVID is today, not the first variant, not last year, not Delta, but today, that we've had our most deadly week ever of COVID. It's actually, numbers are actually looking a lot better literally today. So this was from last Thursday. So last week was like the deadliest week there's ever been with COVID. And for all those people who think, well, that's people dying with COVID, we answer that question in this clip.
The other figure I'm looking at is the mortality rate, which is higher now than it's ever been. And we've just had our most lethal week since the start of the pandemic, where the moving average is up to 38 deaths a day. Now that you need to take 20% out who will be incidental, but it's still over 30 a day. If we run at that rate for the rest of the year, I mean, I should say that is 30% of all deaths in New Zealand at the moment are being caused by this infection.
Wow.
And that's quite shocking. It's way ahead now of heart attacks and cancer as a killer on any one day. So that's a number I find very worrying.
Hey, thank you, Michael. Just one point of clarity. When you're talking about deaths, 38 deaths a day, because at some stage how they were recording deaths was changed. Is that considered 38 deaths caused by COVID, or does that include the ones that people die with COVID? Like just for clarity.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. That is a number that's reported every day. Now, subsequently, it's reviewed, and they take out the deaths which are what we call incidental. So the reporting requirement was death within 28 days of a positive test. Now, 20% of those people did not die of or with COVID and should be removed. So take out 20%.
Okay.
After that, about 25% had some other underlying illness, but COVID-19 contributed to their death.
Sure.
So if they didn't have COVID, they wouldn't have died at that point.
Yeah, gotcha.
And 50% are caused by COVID-19 infection directly. So the true number, if you take out 20%, it's more like 30 a day at the moment, is the true death toll from COVID-19. But you multiply that by 365.
10,000.
It's moving into. I mean, the total number of people dying every year in New Zealand is about 35,000 a year.
Yeah, wow.
So we don't want to add 10,000 to that.
Yeah.
We don't want to add 500 as influenza. We thought that's our biggest infectious disease killer at the moment. Is 500 deaths a year from influenza. COVID-19 is almost an order of magnitude more than that at the moment. So we really don't want it, and we can turn that tap down with the things we've been talking about.
So just for clarity again, this was last week, numbers have come down thankfully, but around last week, 30 deaths a day because of COVID, either directly from COVID or they had underlying other health problems, but if they hadn't caught COVID, they wouldn't have died. And about 5 deaths a day listed as people with COVID, but not being the cause of death. So 30 a day times 365, that would be the equivalent of 10,000 deaths in a year. The flu kills 500 people a year. So for anyone to say it's sort of like the flu, it's got a similarity to the flu. Yeah, don't think so. Flu doesn't cause long COVID, so there's no such thing as long flu. Anyway, as I said, don't often feed the trolls there, George, but we've got that clip now and I'm sure we'll play it more than once. All right, sir.
Thank you. Catch you guys tomorrow, same time.
Appreciate you. All right, see you, dude. There are so many texts and messages coming in that we can't get to all of them. And this is about several of the conversations that have come on. Shortly, we're going to be speaking of Brian Tamaki, about cults of personalities. But right now, let's have a look at some of the questions. Boarding school, very interesting timing. Went to boarding school in the 90s. One of the bullies a year above myself is running for a local council in Hawke's Bay at the moment. I think Brian Bruce spoke a good thing on Facebook about how this is about how Mr. Luxon claims a false about youth benefits. Jay says there's nothing wrong with being on a benefit. Politikiwi says, I find it interesting how politics views unemployment. Economics tells us optimal employment max rate output isn't 100%. So if we, this is kind of what I was asking before, what's that number? So if we don't even want to employ everyone, why do we bash beneficiaries? Kooky Nick says beneficiaries do pay tax, GST, of course, along with the tax they pay out of their benefits as well. I wonder what percentage of national voters are on a benefit, aka the pension. Kim says loved the rant. I don't know about that, but thank you, Kim. Tamaki marches for New Zealanders' freedoms after actively marching against people's freedoms in the past because his God thinks those freedoms are icky. And I guess that's the anything to do with the LGBT community, I'm assuming. And Scott says, I ran the anti-vax wall of shame. For over 10 years, there is little to nothing one can do to convince people who exist within echo chambers that they are wrong, and dangerously so. And look, the texts are still just going bananas here. So I'll leave it for now. Right, let's oh gosh, I've left a comment on. How do I turn that off? There we go. Right, let's have a look at this conversation. A PhD student, a student who has written about cult of personality, Anne-Mette Sundahl. I'm working on that name for a long time. And she has written a piece in the conversation around is Jacinda Ardern popular, or is there a cult of personality around her, which involved a conversation then about Trump and about Putin and about Brian Tamaki. And hopefully you enjoy it. I enjoyed it. And here it is. Joining us direct and live from Copenhagen in Denmark, Anne-Mette Sundahl. Thank you for joining us and good to be speaking to you.
Yeah, nice to be on your show.
I think you're the first person we've had from Denmark. I mean, it's kind of a cool thing to be talking to the other side of the world in your summer.
Yeah.
How's the weather over there? I think that's an important question.
Yeah, so it definitely doesn't feel like summer right now, I must say. It's raining, it's looking very grey and dark, and you definitely can't tell that it's midday because, yeah, it looks like night almost because it's so dark. So, yeah, it's not great.
Now, you've written a piece for The Conversation, and we'll get to that shortly. But the piece for The Conversation has come out of your PhD, and I'll just bring up your PhD for people. The PhD is entitled Personality Cult, or a Mere Matter of Popularity. The paper introduces a theoretical model for distinguishing between mere popularity and personality cults, as there currently is an inflated use of the personality cult concept. So, yeah, we'll get to the article, because the article kind of talks more about do the people who follow like Jacinda Ardern. Is it because she's popular, or is it a personality cult? So we'll get to that in a second. But first of all, do you want to? I know it's very difficult to ask someone doing a PhD to synopsize all of these thoughts that you're putting years and years of effort towards. But what are you looking for? What are you trying to find out when you're looking at the difference between personality cults and popularity?
Yeah, so actually that article you're referring to is just part of my PhD. So it's part of a small section of my theory chapter. So like my entire PhD is like so much more than that. So I'm actually looking at images. So I'm like scraping memes and stuff online of Trump and Putin, and looking at that to show like how that contributes to their personality cult. But yeah, in terms of the article, it was actually because I just noticed that especially journalists or like political commentators, they quite often use personality cult or use the concept of personality cult to describe the popularity of some politicians when it's not actually a personality cult. And I thought that was a problem because that kind of misrepresents the popularity of the politician in question, because not only does it make them seem more infallible than they actually are, but it's also it makes them seem a bit dictatorial, because the personality cult concept has like some negative connotations, because it was first used, or at least became popularized with Khrushchev's speech where he denounced Stalin. So Stalin is quite often the politician or the leader you would think of when you say personality cult. So there is like an implicit comparison there when you call, for instance, Jacinda Ardern a personality cult politician. So that would make you think of someone like Stalin. And I think that's a problem, because that kind of gives people the impression that she's almighty and powerful, and that she can't really be challenged, which is definitely not the case. And I see that quite often in like articles, and even in some scholarly works where there is a bit of like a conceptual confusion. So that's why I decided to write this article, and I actually I kind of conceptualized it as like a continuum. So you have like mere popularity, and then at the other end of the continuum you have a personality cult, a fully fledged personality cult.
Right.
And then you can maybe place different politicians along that continuum or along that line, right? So it's not like necessarily an either or sort of thing. And I actually, in the article, I mentioned 2 dimensions. So there is a representational dimension, and then there is a sociological dimension. And then there are 3 parameters. And then you can actually place the different politicians, so they will score differently. They could potentially have 2 out of 3 characteristics of a personality cult on the representational scale, but no characteristics of a personality cult on the sociological dimension. And then they would, of course, be closer to being just a popular politician on the continuum.
The article we're looking at on the screen right now, if you're watching the video from The Conversation, does Jacinda Ardern's popularity really qualify as a cult of personality, as some critics claim? Before I ask the question about the first bit of highlighted of this, is it that people are using the title personality cult kind of like they're using the title Nazi, or they're kind of throwing that around at the moment, when actually it's sort of evolving into a coverall for I disagree with your politics, as opposed to being an accurate use of the word?
Yeah, that is definitely how I see it. It's a more like for me, it's like a symptom of like sensationalism, right? Because
Yeah.
it's probably more likely that you'll get some clicks if you call it a cult of personality than if you say that she's just popular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean that makes sense. And you go through your article and talking about how, at one stage she was 76%, had popularity ratings of 76%, which I think is almost unheard of. I think John Key got close to that after the Christchurch earthquakes, I believe, and that was because there was a time of crisis, and so we looked to our leaders. You define a personality cult. It parallels religious worship, elevating an individual's authority through the deliberate creation, projection, and propagation of a godlike image. I've had quite a lot to do with religious cults. It was a bit of a personal passion of mine, sort of, I don't know, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, kind of looking into them and delving into them and, even visiting a few of them and going and looking at them. And so when I hear you talking about people like Trump and Putin in your article, I think about people in those churches or religious organizations and what they used to have to do. The infallible person up the front. All of a sudden, they had to live with each other and live in all the same circles and not talk to people outside that group. They did a thing called love bombing, where if you come into their cult, they're like your best friend straight away, and they just cover you in love. And then if you disagree with their cult, you are spat upon and you're the worst thing in the world. So when I hear the word cult per se, that's my personal experience of it. But when you talk about it in a political context and how you're talking about it with Jacinda Ardern versus some others that we'll get into, you think it's pretty clear that she doesn't have that kind of on a pedestal, won't be questioned, because you think about Trump, you think about Trump's followers, and you're like, they never question him no matter what. If they get shown evidence to completely contrary to what he's saying or showing, they find another way to get to that same answer.
Yeah.
That's not the case for Jacinda, you don't think? Or is it not the case for most of us, but there are still a small portion like that? Or is it really just not in New Zealand? That's not what's happening.
I would say that it's not what's happening whatsoever, because even if you talk to loyal Labour voters, even they would question Jacinda, and that would be unheard of in a cult. And I think, maybe you can find a few people who be like, oh, Jacinda is the best and she's infallible. But I think as like a general statement, I would say no, that's not what we're seeing in New Zealand, because if Jacinda said, if she, for instance, had lost the election or something, and she said, "Oh, let's storm Parliament or something like that and overturn the election results," I don't think anyone would actually go along with that in New Zealand. So I think that's the big difference.
Yeah, I've got some questions for you as well about other characters in New Zealand, and there are some people in New Zealand in the political world or political adjacent world where they would do that, and the protests in Wellington at the end of last year are sort of an example of some of that. But first of all, I wanted to, I guess, read out a bit from your article and demonstrate sort of what you're saying about what people will and won't do for Jacinda, and also what the person needs to do themselves to sort of put themselves on that pedestal to then be that godlike to be worshipped. I mean, you say this: over the past few years, artists have depicted Ardern as Wonder Woman, as pop cultural figures like Star Wars Princess Leia or Rosie the Riveter from World War II marketing imagery. But there have been no official attempts from Ardern or the government to depict her as a hero, in stark contrast to how Trump and Putin have contributed to their own glorification. Trump, for example, photoshopped an image, and I think that's the one we can see there, on the face of Rocky Balboa's body and posted it on social media. The Russian government has released numerous official photos of Putin riding around bare-chested in the Siberian wilderness, cultivating an image of the leader as the ideal Russian man. So that's a big part of it, yeah. Basically, if there is, and I'll use the word that's incorrect, but if there was a cult of personality around Jacinda, she's not participating in it, which kind of means it's not a cult of personality.
Yeah. So in order for it to be a cult of personality, you need it to be cultivated from above. So that is quite often where you see it starting, like when at the early stages of a personality cult, it's like the leaders trying to create a certain narrative or convey a certain image of themselves, and then obviously that narrative needs to be accepted by the public, so they need to go along with it. But if you only see the grassroots part of the cult, so it's not cultivated from above, then it's not really a cult, because a cult of personality is also a matter of the leader using that popularity as a means of power. It's a power instrument. And if
Yeah.
it's not cultivated from above, that's kind of the leader saying, okay, I'm not going along with it. I'm not using this to get my way or get more power. Or
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there has to be a willing participant to, like my experience of the church, the dude up the front. And I was going to say dude or dudette, but there's never a dudette up the front when it comes to a religious cult. So let's just say the dude up the front. He has to be a willing participant in the conversation to put himself on the pedestal, even if they are also. He has to be agreeing to putting himself on the pedestal to be the kind of sole source of truth that there is. And I know when I say that, some people are going to criticize me because at one stage, very early on in the COVID outbreak, Jacinda made a statement about being the sole source of truth, the government. Now, that's been blown up out of all proportion currently because people are thinking that that's Jacinda saying the government is the only place you can find truth. What she was actually saying is at the moment on day 2 of the COVID, we're the ones that have the accurate information. Listen to the government right now. So, but people are still using that now like it's current when it was from a couple of years ago. To reiterate a bit what you're saying about this, here's some more of the article. It says Trump, on the other hand, has encouraged, this is about the participating. Trump, on the other hand, has encouraged his supporters to unlawfully storm the Capitol in an attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election results. Recent congressional hearings have found these supporters rioted after being encouraged by Trump and stopped when Trump told them to go home. And I think that's a huge one. I interviewed the documentary filmmaker 2 weeks ago who made the 3-part series Unprecedented. So I talked to him for an hour and a half, who was on the stage with Trump on the day of January 6th. And I think personally, from looking at all the evidence and listening to what everyone's saying, the point that they stopped is almost more damning, because we can say, I'm going to fight cancer. You can use these words like fight and attack and these things in a metaphorical way. But as soon as you tell people to stop rampaging and they stop, that's like, that to me is almost is more a confirmation of who these people were and what control, President Trump has over them.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think it's also significant that there are actually some people saying that he knew about them being armed before he actually encouraged them to riot or storm the Capitol. So I think that's also, it shows that he, at least to some extent, probably knew what he was doing, or he knew that there could be some serious consequences. But actually, I would like to say, in terms of what you were saying about dudes and dudettes, that's actually interesting, because in terms of like the traditional scholarly literature on personality cults, and one of the key defining characteristics of a personality cult is actually that it's paternalistic. So it's not even theorized as something that can arise around women, which is not necessarily something I agree with, because I think the reasoning behind it was, quite often when we talk about personality cults, we talk about personality cults from like the 50s or something. And that was a different time. So like having a female leader is way more common now. But if we accept the idea of a personality cult actually arising around a woman, like what would it look like? Because it might not necessarily look like the personality cult of a man. Because as we see with like Putin, for instance, it is very gendered. Like he is portrayed as very like super macho, naked upper body sportsman, right? So would that be the same with a woman? So that is also an interesting discussion.
So that's really interesting, and I think straight away that the question could be asked: Can females take on paternalistic qualities as opposed to maternalistic? And I think about what's happening in America at the moment with a whole bunch of people like the Lauren Boeberts of the world, who are sort of the alt-right, clone supporting Republicans, and the information they put out is very, it's very masculine and very strong. It's carrying guns. It's, stuff these snowflakes. It comes across as quite not masculine like they're masculine, but the words they're using and the imagery they're using seems to be very masculine. So that sort of, I don't know, maybe that does sort of line up with what you're saying.
Yeah, But I also think it's interesting. So it's not something that I've done extensive research on whatsoever, but it's definitely something that I want to do at some stage. But if you look at how the former German Chancellor Angela Merkel was depicted, she was quite often depicted in like the comic strips in newspapers in the like a latex outfit, like a dominatrix, and then she was like kind of whipping the other European political leaders. And I think that is quite often like how women are portrayed. So I guess that's a way of making her seem masculine or in charge, but it's also very sexualized in a different way than just Putin riding around bare-chested on a horse.
Yeah, it's almost like the only way a woman can have power over a man if there's a sexual element to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas a man can have power over a woman just any way they want, but there has to be that little addendum. By the way, let's dress her in rubber in the cartoons, at least. In the cartoons. The other thing that's interesting as I think about this is, like, I think about some characters in the New Zealand political world, and we'll talk about them shortly, but it seems that mainstream politics, you don't have these cult figures. They're often fringe. And the difference with what has happened in America is that if we talk about a quote-unquote liberal democracy, so that kind of eliminates Russia, you don't have these cult-like figures as the leaders until Trump. And Trump seems to be the anomaly. And I mean, do you have any opinions about what this means for politics in America? Like, someone's found a formula that works. Is it just a formula and they're grifting and playing a job? Or is this a deep-seated issue within the right-wing American politics now?
I think the interesting thing about Trump is that he was seen as anti-establishment.
Yep.
And he was seen as, like, even though he was born into money, he was also seen as like a self-made man. Right. And I think that kind of, so I think like it wasn't actually because people necessarily liked Trump that he was elected in the first place. It was just because they disliked the establishment. So like, the Hillary Clinton's,
totally.
Hillary Clinton. But seen from like, a more theoretical point of view, that is actually not surprising that then a cult would arise around a person like Trump, because it is something that happens around a revolutionary figure, theoretically anyway. So I think that is kind of like, what we saw in the States, right? He was this revolutionary figure. He was this person who could change everything and, get rid of crooked Hillary and all the other crooked politicians, right? Yeah.
And the irony being obviously one of the most crooked men himself. You just look at his history and his background. And I've done another podcast with a guy called Stephen Lewandowski, who's based out of, I think, Berlin. And he talks about why people fall for conspiracy theories and all of this kind of cults, conspiracy theories. There's so many overlapping. The Venn diagram is very small, with the with the part in the middle being very large. It's a very large crossover. I wanted to ask you about, now I know you're not like a specialist in New Zealand politics, but you've spent time here, so you probably, I'm assuming, have heard of Brian Tamaki.
Yeah.
Yep. So he was one of the people that's in my head that I'm thinking about. The weekend that's just gone, there has been another sort of quote unquote rights and freedoms protest where Brian Tamaki has come out saying they're starting up, not him personally, but there's a new party starting up. It's going to be an umbrella party, and there's 4 minor parties who have already signed up to it. Of course, he wouldn't tell us what they were. But what it means is, like, he's one of the people that I'm thinking of. He is this figure that if he tells his followers to go and do it, they will. And if it's quote unquote proven that what he's saying is wrong, it won't matter to his followers, because his followers think he literally speaks from God, and he is also God-like. Would he be a good example, as much as you know of him, of someone in New Zealand who's got that sort of cult personality type status?
Well, in general, I would probably refrain from calling him a personality cult figure, because I think it's something that's reserved for political leaders. So like the heads of governments or head of state. Because having a personality cult entails some form of authority, like legitimate authority. So you can actually wield your power over people who don't necessarily agree with you. And that's not the case with Brian Tamaki, right? He has some followers who worship him or see him as infallible, but he doesn't really have power over people who disagree with him.
So there has to be that element of the access to power to which he has none. So that might be a quote unquote cult, but it's not a cult of personality. Okay. So that when you say it like that they need access to power, I can't think of anyone in the New Zealand political scene that would actually fit. Because if they need to have access to the ninth floor of the Beehive, then there's really only two people who potentially have access to it. One is Christopher Luxon, and the other is Jacinda Ardern at the moment.
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
the only two, and neither of those people fit that bill.
No, but I think there's one of the articles that I have linked to in my own opinion piece for the conversation where it actually says that Jacinda Ardern is a cult of personality politician, and so was John Key. And I feel like that is a very, again, a very liberal use of the concept. And it's just, okay, if you have a popular politician, then okay, they have a personality cult. Because I think I can see why some people might be tempted to say that Jacinda as a personality cult, but I think John Key, I don't see that. I feel like that's even more of a stretch.
But then again, if this conversation was happening, in 3 weeks after the Christchurch quakes, maybe so. I mean, the reason that people seem to be pointing to Jacinda Ardern as having a cult of personality or a personality cult is because of her popularity around COVID. If you hit the conversation at the same time that he was as popular as that, maybe people would have a different perspective. But I think that when you attribute what these things, right? I like to sort of simplify things because I'm a very, very simple man. When you think about these things, like they have to participate in it and they have to have access to power, then that eliminates anyone in New Zealand politics, because even if someone in, say, ACT or the Greens or the Māori Party or something was like that, they don't have access to power. They're not going to be on the ninth floor as the Prime Minister of this country. So it's actually quite nice to hear that, even though there are some sort of Trumpian-led tactics coming into New Zealand politics, we're not going to see, certainly in the short term, any Trumpian characters in power in New Zealand politics.
No, I don't think so. And also, as I briefly state in the conversation piece towards the end, is I think in New Zealand you just don't have the culture for actually cultivating a cult of personality, because it is a very relatively egalitarian society, and with the tall poppy syndrome and all that sort of stuff, I think it is unlikely that you will see an egalomaniac like Trump or something like that.
I think in New Zealand we're a bit like, oh, settle down, mate. Pull your head in. She'll be right. Come on.
Yeah.
So, but that's a bit on the nose, mate. Come on, let's settle down a bit here, shall we, fellas? Let's have a beer and settle down. No, I think that's a really interesting aspect as well. Our personalities as Kiwis make it less difficult for there to be a cult of personality as a prime minister or one of the major leaders. Because probably if someone did that, they wouldn't. They have to have an element of popularity to them. Our leaders typically need to be quite likable, and most of those people who come off like that, like I'm thinking about the people I know, obviously who haven't been cult of personality because they haven't had the power, but have been like cult-like figures, are basically all pricks and not particularly likable. I mean, they may be able to fool a few people, but overall they're basically assholes. And we're not going to elect an asshole anytime soon. There has to be a massive shift in New Zealand voting for that to happen.
Yeah, so I definitely don't think it's a danger in New Zealand that you'll have a cult of personality politician. But I think the danger is if you keep talking about someone like Jacinda Ardern as a cult of personality politician, you will see that people will maybe be a bit more negative towards New Zealand politics, and they'll feel like they'll be less likely to actually engage politically, because they're like, oh, there's no use, right? It doesn't matter. She will just go unchallenged and she can get away with whatever she wants.
It might also mean as well that if someone did pop up, you might miss them. Because if you thought Jacinda Ardern, like they talk about Trump and they're like, this is the person we've warned you about for 40 years. And you sort of missed him coming. And now he's here. The reason that they all talk about the Second Amendment, but they don't understand that, the Second Amendment talking about, a well-armed militia to fight back against the government is actually sort of talking about someone like Trump, but they're the guys who are also talking about their Second Amendment rights. But he's also the example of someone who has literally tried to overthrow democracy, which is what the Second Amendment is for. So they kind of missed it coming in, focusing on what it could be. Then when they saw it, they missed it. So I guess that's maybe a risk as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Hey, this has been fascinating. I would love to stay in touch. I'd love to talk to you again. And when does your did you say before you had 7 months left for your PhD?
Yeah, hopefully.
And you
hopefully
said
I won't have to extend.
This is just an article from it. What's the overall PhD, and has it got a title, or what is it actually focused on in particular?
Well, so it's a working title, but I focus on postmodern personality cults. So I argue that we actually need to rethink how we define personality cults, because the personality cults that we see today are different from the personality cults that we saw with Stalin or Mao or a similar sort of political figure in what I would call the modern era. So like in the 50s. So I argue that today we actually see that there are a lot more bottom-up influences. So because of like the internet and social media and smartphones and all that sort of stuff, people can actually contribute more directly to the cult. So you can make a meme of Putin riding a great white shark and post it on Reddit, and it will go viral, and that will be part of the Putin narrative then. And that's not really something that the Kremlin can control in any way. So I think that definitely changes how we perceive personality cults and the power that entails. So that's what my PhD is about, more generally speaking.
I think straight away of that, I think it was a GIF or a GIF that came out of Donald Trump clotheslining the CNN logo, that kind of thing, which was obviously was a ground roots, from the ground up kind of thing. But then Trump, of course, amplified it by retweeting it. So he participated in it as well. So oh, it's fascinating. Anne-Mette Sundahl, thank you for joining us today. As I said, first person speaking to us from Denmark. I'm terribly sorry I just butchered your name terribly there, but I've really appreciated talking to you, and I hope we get a chance to catch up again soon, maybe as you continue to publish on the conversation, and when you get towards the end of your PhD, it would be amazing to have you again.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you for having me.
All right, that's us. I hope you enjoyed that. There was obviously Anne-Mette was there talking about the cult of personality. Just by chance, I booked her in last week. We talked over the weekend, and she was booked in, and that actually lined up to talk about what was happening with the Freedom and Rights Coalition. There's the texts have been busy, but here's just a couple that have come through. I kind of, even though when I used to work in Talkback, when you had a grumpy night, like if you had a night of Talkback where you were just like frustrated, and the boss would say, "I heard you blew a foo-foo valve last night," meaning that was sort of the foo-foo valve. Hey, come here. Where have you been? Come here. Up. Oh, it's my girl. Where's my girl? You haven't been? Where have you been? You've been out with the kids. Go, lie down. So I blew a bit of a foo-foo valve tonight, but I did also understand and did also say that, ultimately, Sam Uffindell, we can all have a redemption story, but it does feel pretty, it feels pretty dirty that there was a hidden story that wasn't told to the voters of Tauranga. And I would be really, really surprised if the National Party knew the full extent. I mean, words from Mr. Uffindell himself saying he couldn't confirm or not whether they beat this 13-year-old with wooden legs from a bed, but it may have happened. Like, honestly, okay, cards on the table. He won't be around for much longer. There you go. He won't be around for much longer. It's 19 past 11. It's the 8th of the 8th. You heard it here first. He won't be around for much longer. Now, in saying all of that there should be a redemption story. Tony also said Uffindell was a school bully, but people will change. Hopefully, he's not the person he was then. I agree, and I think that's fair. But as I said, this was hidden from the public eye, and now it's come out. And well, no, the worst part of it was beating a 13-year-old, assaulting a 13-year-old. But there's a pretty ugly part about it where you just by coincidence happen to go make an apology before you want to get into politics. That's pretty scody. Tones also says, I'm not a troll, but I was thinking about mean things I did when I was a teenager. I hope that I have grown up. That's why I'm a bit more optimistic about Uffindell. Not that I would vote for National anyway. They are back to attacking unemployed people, which is horrible. I agree about one of you who said how National has set up a contrast between those who pay taxes and those who are getting benefits. And of the Freedom and Rights Coalition, Bradley says, I can assure you that many of the freedom fighters do not align with Tamaki. Well, here is your problem, right? And I didn't manage to talk to Mark Graham about this, but I was going to, just to wrap up the show. We didn't talk about the announcement that Tamaki made about the Umbrella political party. Now, I don't know whether it's literally called Umbrella. It could be. Or he's just talking about it's an umbrella and it's bringing 4 little parties together. I love that idea. From someone who votes on the left, you're surprised? If you hadn't known that, you're surprised? I love that idea. At every election, pretty much except for the last one, and that was thanks to COVID, that Labor got a majority and has wasted it over 2 years. Anyway, business comes down to 2, 3, or 4%. It honestly does. It can go either way by a couple of percent. Brian Tamaki and the Umbrella Party, and I'll say this here second, it's 2 minutes later, there is no way they will get into politics. There's no way that parties of 4 will get in there. There's already been a couple of the bigger minor parties who have said they're not involved, like the New Conservatives and Advance New Zealand. There's no way they'll get in. But what they will do is siphon off voters from the right. And if they siphon off voters from the right, that gives fewer voters to National and ACT and more of a chance that there will be a left-wing government next time around, which is my style of government. Now, I'm blatant about that, right? We are on the show. We say very clearly we come from a left-wing perspective. Those of us who do this, we're all spaced differently on the left wing. I'm probably more the sort of center left kind of person. The other guys go further off to the left in their political ideologies. But I also know that we are setting up something here where we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So whilst we all say we come from the left in our ideology, when the left requires criticism, we criticize them. When the right requires praise, we praise them. National, if you get rid of Uffindell the next 48 hours, you'll get a ton in praise from here because it's the right thing to do, right? And you know what? If Uffindell was a well-known figure in Tauranga for going through some kind of, I can't think of the word for retraining, but, like some kind of reconciliation, some kind of getting over it, some kind of penance publicly, and was now a changed man, no one would be talking about it. But it's because it was hidden, and there feels like, in my honest held belief, there was a fake apology made. The victim thinks that as well, by the way, if you missed the part of the show, and then it's come out later. It feels very different. And I don't think he'll survive, because if he survives, then Christopher Luxon is going to get those conversations forevermore. I worked for News Talk ZB when, what was his name? Tony, what's his name? He used to read One News, and he was found guilty or something of breaking his girlfriend's back. Remember that guy? I can't think of his surname. Gosh, isn't it funny when names go away? Tony, someone in the chat will help me out there. He used to read the sports on One News. He was a news commentator. He did shows on Radio Sport. And what happened at Radio Sport was Tony Veach, thank you, Paul, Tony Veach, every time a comment, because after all that news came through, he came back and worked for Radio Sport again. And every single time there was a news story that the guys and girls on Radio Sport would talk about, like let's say there was and this happened, I heard it, there was a rugby league player in Australia who had like convicted of a crime, and he came back to play NRL after he served his time. And commentators there, like commentators as in announcers on Radio Sport, would say, no, the crime's too serious, he should not be given a second chance. The telephone lines would light up because they're like, excuse me, do you know that guy Tony Veach who works for your station who broke his girlfriend's back? I want to say allegedly, just in case. I always want to protect myself from that. But, there were some pretty serious accusations and crimes committed there. We know that definitely were crimes committed. And so because Radio Sport chose to employ Tony Veach after that came out, Radio Sport had to defend his actions forevermore when the circumstances came up. If they don't get rid of Uffindell, then Christopher Luxon will have to defend his actions forevermore when news stories come up that relate to violence amongst young people, via attacks, people committing crimes and not getting. He's got to go. There you go. I'm very, very confident he'll go. In fact, I'll place a small wager that he'll go. Could be wrong, but there you go. Thanks, guys. I support FARC off Brian. I think most sane people do. And all you guys are chatting away to each other there. And thank you guys for reminding me Tony Veach. It's funny, I couldn't remember his name. So yeah. So that's what will happen to National. If they don't get rid of him, every time a story comes up in the news that relates to some kind of act of violence, Luxon will get challenged on it. Every time Luxon wants to challenge the government on, let's say, their reaction to violent crime, it will come up again. So he's got to go. He'll go. All right, team. It's bedtime. I've been here for too long. I've been enjoyable tonight, though, even though I blew my foo-foo valve. I'm getting messages from people saying that I have to clip out that bit where I went off on Uffindell. Maybe I will embarrass myself some more, but we will. Remember, follow us on Twitter, at Pat Britton, really easy place to find all our content. Thanks for being on board tonight, and we will see you tomorrow night from 10 p.m. for another edition of Big Hairy News.